In this episode of The Nation Speaks, remember Afghanistan? 7 months ago, it was in the news 24/7, and then it cycled right on out. Well, there's been some significant developments we should keep an eye on. We sit down for a deep dive on all things Taliban with Afghanistan's former Deputy Foreign Minister, Jawed Ludin. Then in America Q&A, we ask, what do you think about Elon Musk's $44 billion bid to buy Twitter? Finally, in our second America Q&A, we find out if flyers across the country plan to be masks on or masks off now that the CDC mandate has been overruled. Hello and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker. Last August, Americans were glued to the news, watching the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan and the rapid collapse of the Afghan government into Taliban hands. But within a few weeks, the news cycle moved on and Afghanistan fell off the radar of concern for most casual observers. Obviously, forgetting is not an option for people inside Afghanistan under a regime that remains unrecognized, heavily sanctioned, and deeply impoverished. So what does life look like for Afghans? What are its prospects? And is it a threat to Americans? That's what we discuss with our very special guest. We are honored to have with us today Jawed Ludin, who served in several high-level positions in the Afghan government from 2003 to 2013, including presidential spokesman, chief of staff to President Karzai, and deputy foreign minister, as well as serving as Afghanistan's ambassador to the Nordic countries and to Canada, where he currently is. He's also been an entrepreneur and founded the Hearts of Asia Society, a think tank working to expand research and dialogue inside Afghanistan and the region. Jawed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
For a country that until recently was such a strong focal point for Americans, I think few people have been tracking its progress since the country fell to the Taliban last August. So I'd like you to give us an update on the state of the country, both domestically and what it means internationally. Let's start with domestic affairs. What has Taliban rule looked like over the past 7 months?
Well, it's only in a few limited instances things have improved, and I think the primary instance is the fact that there is no longer a war going on around the country. The country has also become more accessible, so people and certainly humanitarian organizations that were involved in this humanitarian crisis over the past winter were able to access a lot of places with which they couldn't in the past. Now, I think that's practically where it stops. Other than that, life has been a miserable episode between two uncertainties from the past, where Afghans were completely tired of a never-ending war, and people were fed up and they wanted peace at any cost. But then they came to a place in which there is, right now, there is no hope and no clarity in terms of where they're going. The Taliban have not really changed. They did receive an opportunity at the beginning by virtue of conquering the country militarily. They essentially had a clean slate to make it into an opportunity, bringing Afghans together and creating a unified, forward-looking and stable and secure Afghanistan. Sadly, that seems to have not happened, and the Taliban have been very much focused in the initial stages on a lot of sort of trying to consolidate their power. And now they're still struggling internally, and the radical ones, the ones that are very conservative, seem to still have the ascendancy, and the decision that came with regard to education of girls, the role of women in public life, but also generally a responsible approach to governance, rebuilding institutions, making the government responsible, and bringing in professional technocrats to fill government roles. None of those things seem to have happened.
Okay, you touched on so many things I want to follow up on. One quick question, I guess. When they established the government or the cabinet in early September, that was supposed to be provisional until they establish more stable government. Has any of that leadership changed? Has it been more inclusive? Have they changed anything significantly since then?
Only marginally. There have been some changes and some attempts. They have brought from their own ranks and file people and personalities belonging to one or two other ethnic groups. But I think a real attempt to make government more inclusive and make society more pluralistic has not happened, and it's doubtful if it will ever happen. Because it is a government that's very strongly known and shaped by its ideological identity, and it's probably going to be very hard for them to just embrace pluralism. And I think the fear also is that there is no plan. I mean, when the government was announced, and it was announced as a caretaker government, there were assumptions that they had a plan, that this would be a caretaker and then this would be followed by a more permanent arrangement, a more inclusive arrangement. We're beginning to realize, and we have now realized this for some months, that in fact there is no plan. They are improvising as they go, and with the kind of hardline leaders that are still in charge, it will not likely to improve in the near future. There are nowadays, having said that, there were talks of a change in this beginning of spring. I think the decision that came about women's education on the 23rd of March completely shattered those hopes. Now, again, they're talking about possible hopeful reforms and steps to be taken, but I would only believe it when I see it.
You mentioned March 23rd. I know a few things changed then. Can you explain a bit more what happened on March 23rd and where you think that came from?
Well, in the weeks before that, the Taliban had opened universities, and girls were allowed to go to universities across the country. And there were also sort of very clear understanding, and the Taliban had made specific indications that they were also planning the same for schools. Where and 23rd of March is the beginning of Afghan school year every year, and that there would be across the country, girls and boys would be able to go to school. But they would also that was just basically taken for granted. There was not even a question of not that being allowed because of the understanding that had been reached, I think, particularly in their contacts with the international community, with diplomats that they were talking to in Qatar. I just want to emphasize one thing, that the Taliban have not been engaging with a lot of Afghans. So there's no sort of non-Taliban body of Afghans that they systematically engage with and make promises to or feel themselves accountable to in any way. So the only measure for us to hold them is to the promises that they're making to foreign diplomats.